There's a story we all know. A boy who lives in a faraway land where adventure never ends and the days are free from the burdens of time. His name is Peter Pan, a boy who made a choice to never grow up. But what if Peter Pan isn't just a character in a children's book? What if he's a metaphor for something far more real? What if, in today's world, many men have become trapped in Neverland, not by choice, but by circumstance? This is what psychologists now call Peter Pan syndrome, a phenomenon where grown men find themselves unable or unwilling to embrace the responsibilities of adulthood. They drift through life as if it's an endless playground, avoiding the demands of maturity, stable relationships, and the weight of responsibility. We'll explore why so many modern men struggle to grow up. We'll look at how society, upbringing, and inner fears can keep someone stuck in a perpetual adolescence. And more importantly, we'll try to understand what it really means to grow up and why it matters. The term Peter Pan syndrome was first coined by psychologist Dr. Dan Kiley in 1983. In his book, The Peter Pan Syndrome: Men Who Have Never Grown Up, Kiley described a growing number of men who, despite reaching adulthood in years, seemed stuck in a state of perpetual adolescence. Men who resisted the natural progression into maturity, clinging instead to the carefree world of youth. It's important to note that Peter Pan syndrome isn't a formal diagnosis. You won't find it listed in the DSM or any official psychological manual. And yet, the concept has resonated deeply because it describes something we can all see in ourselves, in others, and in the world around us. It's less a clinical label and more a framework, a lens through which we can examine the subtle ways modern men may avoid the weight of adulthood. At the core of Peter Pan syndrome are three defining traits. First, emotional immaturity, the inability or unwillingness to process emotions in a mature way. Instead of facing conflict or discomfort, there's a retreat into distraction, whether through entertainment, addictions, or simply denying reality. Second, fear of commitment. Commitment, whether in relationships, careers, or life choices, requires sacrifice. It demands that we invest ourselves deeply in something beyond personal pleasure. But for the man stuck in Peter Pan syndrome, commitment often feels like a trap, an end to freedom rather than a path to growth. And third, avoidance of responsibility. True adulthood carries with it a sense of duty, to ourselves, to others, and to the world. Yet the Peter Pan man sidesteps this. Responsibility is seen as a burden, an unnecessary weight that takes away from the pursuit of fun, novelty, and escape. But where does this come from? And why is it becoming more common in today's world? Growing up has never been easy. But in today's world, many men are finding the transition into adulthood not just difficult, but almost impossible. To understand why, we need to look beyond the individual and examine the world that shapes him. In previous generations, adulthood came early. At 18 or even younger, men were expected to step into adult roles, to work, to marry, to provide. Today, the pathway has shifted. Education stretches well into a man's 20s, and economic instability makes milestones like homeownership or financial independence feel perpetually out of reach. The world demands qualifications, credentials, and experience, yet offers fewer opportunities to gain them. As a result, the traditional markers of adulthood are delayed, and with them, the responsibilities that force a man to grow. But there's more to it than external circumstances. Modern life offers comforts that make it easy, seductively easy, to remain in a state of prolonged adolescence. Video games provide endless adventures without risk. Streaming services deliver distraction on demand. Social media offers validation without connection. It's a digital neverland where excitement, novelty, and escape are always a click away. And while these things aren't inherently bad, they can become a refuge, a place to hide from the difficult, often painful process of maturing. Fear of responsibility. Responsibility has always been the defining line between youth and adulthood. But in today's world, it feels heavier than ever. Men are expected to succeed in their careers, to be emotionally intelligent, to be strong yet sensitive, ambitious yet balanced. The weight of these expectations can feel overwhelming. And with overwhelming pressure comes an intense fear of failure. The fear of not being good enough, of letting others down, of being rejected. For many, it's safer to not even try. Easier to avoid commitment, responsibility, and the potential pain that comes with it. And then there's the issue of guidance. In the past, young men often had clear role models, fathers, mentors, elders who guided them through the difficult transition into manhood. But today, many grow up in homes without a stable father figure. Traditional mentorship has declined, and male rites of passage have faded. Without someone to model maturity, to demonstrate what it means to be a man in a meaningful way, many drift, uncertain of what adulthood should even look like. And so, many men find themselves stuck in a cycle, longing for purpose but fearing the weight it brings, craving connection but avoiding the vulnerability it requires, wanting to grow up but not knowing how. Nowhere is Peter Pan syndrome more visible or more painful than in intimate relationships. While the man who refuses to grow up may seem carefree, spontaneous, and fun at first, beneath the surface lies a deeper problem: an inability to form lasting, meaningful connections. And over time, the fantasy begins to crumble. At the heart of Peter Pan syndrome in relationships is a deep reluctance to commit. On the surface, it may seem like fear of being tied down or losing personal freedom. But underneath, it's often a fear of emotional risk. Real relationships demand vulnerability. They require two people to step into uncertainty together, to build something that could just as easily fail as succeed. For the Peter Pan man, that risk feels unbearable. Rather than face the possibility of rejection or disappointment, he stays at a distance, keeping things casual, avoiding labels, finding reasons to move on when things get too serious. Commitment becomes the enemy, a symbol of adulthood he's desperate to avoid. In many cases, this leads to something we can call romantic infantilism. Rather than approaching a partner as an equal, a fellow adult with their own needs, desires, and complexities, the man-child often looks for someone to take care of him. Someone who will manage the responsibilities he shirks, who will mother him rather than challenge him to grow. This dynamic can seem charming at first. He's carefree, spontaneous, fun-loving. But over time, the burden shifts. The partner becomes the emotional caretaker, picking up the slack, managing the hard parts of life while he remains in Neverland. And what was once playful becomes exhausting. One of the defining features of Peter Pan syndrome in relationships is emotional unavailability. Mature love requires the courage to be vulnerable, to share fears, to sit with discomfort. But for the man who refuses to grow up, these moments of intimacy feel threatening. He struggles to handle conflict without withdrawing, shutting down, or deflecting. He may avoid difficult conversations, suppress his feelings, or retreat into distractions rather than face emotional reality. This creates a relationship where true connection is impossible. Everything stays on the surface. Deep emotional intimacy is sacrificed in favor of short-term comfort. For partners, most often women in heterosexual relationships, this dynamic can be deeply frustrating and painful. At first, they may be drawn to his youthful energy, his spontaneity, his refusal to conform. But over time, they find themselves in a caretaker role, shouldering the emotional and practical responsibilities he avoids. Many describe feeling burdened, as if they are parenting a partner rather than building a life together. They carry the weight of the relationship while he remains emotionally absent, unavailable, and unwilling to step into adulthood. Eventually, resentment builds, and many women find themselves having to make a difficult choice: to stay and continue carrying the burden, or to leave and seek a relationship built on mutual respect, maturity, and true partnership. In the end, Peter Pan syndrome doesn't just harm the man stuck in perpetual adolescence. It fractures relationships and leaves both partners unfulfilled. In the next section, We'll explore the deeper psychological roots behind this refusal to grow up. Because before we can understand how to move forward, we need to understand where the fear begins. For the man who refuses to grow up, the avoidance of responsibility isn't just about laziness or apathy. It's rooted in something deeper. Fear. Responsibility, after all, isn't just about tasks or duties. It's about purpose. And stepping into purpose requires courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about life. One of the most common arenas where this fear plays out is career. Choosing a path in life, whether it's a job, a profession, or a calling, means making a commitment. It means closing certain doors to walk through others. For the Peter Pan man, this feels suffocating. The fear of choosing wrong, of getting stuck in a life he didn't truly want, keeps him paralyzed. So, he drifts. Temporary jobs, unfinished projects, ideas that never quite take form. But there's more at stake here than just indecision. In traditional masculine roles, much of a man's sense of identity was tied to his ability to provide, to offer security, stability, and strength to those he cares about. In today's world, where economic pressures are immense and traditional gender roles are more fluid, this responsibility can feel overwhelming. Some men opt out altogether, convinced they can't bear the weight. It's easier to remain in a state of prolonged adolescence, free from expectations, than to risk failure. There is a constant internal struggle between the desire for freedom and the need for stability. Youth is defined by freedom, the ability to act without consequence, to explore without limits. Adulthood, on the other hand, requires trade-offs. It asks us to give up certain freedoms in exchange for stability, meaning, and deeper fulfillment. But many men today cling desperately to the fantasy of absolute freedom. They believe maturity will trap them, that responsibility is a prison. What they often fail to see is that stability, the kind earned through responsibility, creates a deeper form of freedom. The freedom to build, to love, to create something lasting. Instead, they remain stuck in the cycle of chasing novelty, never realizing they are just as confined by their avoidance as they fear they would be by commitment. Beneath all of this lies an existential fear, one that often goes unnamed. To truly embrace adulthood is to confront life's harshest realities. Maturity brings with it an awareness of mortality, of time's passage, of the fact that life is finite. Childhood is infinite in its possibilities, but adulthood forces us to make choices and to accept that we can't do everything. We can't be everything. For many men, this confrontation is terrifying. Growing up is not just about taking on responsibility. It's about recognizing limitations. It's about understanding that youth doesn't last forever, that opportunities can pass, and that life eventually comes to an end. Some retreat from this awareness, holding tightly to the illusion of perpetual youth in a desperate attempt to outrun the truth of their own mortality. But true adulthood doesn't mean giving in to despair. It means embracing the finiteness of life as the very thing that gives it meaning. It's in limitation that we find purpose. It's in responsibility that we find ourselves. And yet, many never take this step. They remain in Neverland, unwilling to grow up, fearing that if they do, they'll lose everything they think makes life worth living. Our world is obsessed with youth. You see it everywhere, on screens, in advertising, across social media. Being young isn't just a phase of life anymore. It's become an ideal, a standard of living we are told to strive for, to preserve at all costs. But beneath this celebration lies a subtle danger, the belief that youth is the only stage of life worth living. We live in a time where the forever young lifestyle is glorified. Influencers flood social media with curated images of endless adventure, spontaneous fun, and lives free from burden or responsibility. Pop culture sells us stories of rebellion against the mundane. Characters who refuse to settle down, who avoid attachments, who prioritize pleasure and novelty above all else. Even the language of modern culture romanticizes the rejection of aging. Phrases like, "You're only as young as you feel," and "never grow up," are mantras we repeat without question. Age is treated as a disease to be avoided, rather than a natural evolution to be embraced. And for many men, this creates an impossible standard. They're told that to grow up is to grow old, and to grow old is to become irrelevant. So they resist. They chase after the same experiences they had in their youth, believing that maturity is synonymous with decline, boredom, or loss of self. They trade long-term fulfillment for the quick hit of validation that comes with appearing young, free, and unattached. But it wasn't always this way. In traditional societies, there were clear rites of passage, rituals and experiences that marked the transition from boyhood to manhood. These weren't just symbolic. They were psychological and emotional crucibles, trials that forced a young man to confront his limitations, his fears, and ultimately his place in the world. They taught him responsibility, resilience, and purpose. Today, most of these rites have disappeared. There are few clear transitions, few communal moments that say, "Now you are a man." Without these markers, many drift. They remain suspended in boyhood, uncertain when or how they are supposed to cross into adulthood. Society gives no clear answer, and so the natural desire to grow and evolve is replaced with uncertainty, hesitation, and sometimes apathy. In this cultural vacuum, we are left with men who physically age but psychologically remain boys. Not because they lack potential, but because the world around them no longer provides the scaffolding to help them grow. To truly understand Peter Pan syndrome, we have to look beneath the surface, into the unconscious, where deeper psychological forces are at work. It's not just cultural, and it's not just personal. The refusal to grow up is something Carl Jung spent much of his life exploring, and what he found is as relevant today as it was in his time. In Jungian psychology, there is an archetype known as the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy. He is youthful, full of potential, always dreaming, always on the verge of something great. He refuses limitation, rejects boundaries, and lives in a world of endless possibility. The Puer Aeternus is the spirit of perpetual adolescence, untouched by the weight of responsibility or the passage of time. On the surface, the Puer is enchanting. He is creative, spontaneous, free. But Jung warned that the Puer Aeternus, when unbalanced, can become destructive. His refusal to descend from the world of dreams into the reality of life leaves him disconnected, rootless, and ultimately unfulfilled. He fears commitment because it would mean the death of possibility, the end of his youthful fantasy. This archetype lives in many men today. They are caught between the seductive allure of the eternal boy and the painful necessity of growing into something grounded, mature, and whole. Jung also spoke of the mother complex, which often lies at the heart of the Puer Aeternus dynamic. Many men who struggle to grow up have either been overprotected by a nurturing but smothering mother, or abandoned emotionally by a mother who was absent, whether physically or psychologically. In cases of overprotection, the mother's constant care prevents the boy from developing autonomy. He is shielded from the trials that would normally force him to stand on his own. Dependency becomes a way of life. There's an unconscious desire to remain the child who is cared for, who never has to take on the burdens of responsibility. In cases of abandonment, the opposite wound forms. The boy may grow up without a sense of safety or attachment, and so he retreats into himself, avoiding intimacy or commitment later in life because he fears abandonment all over again. In both cases, the emotional development needed to become a self-reliant man is delayed or entirely blocked. But perhaps the deepest root of all is the fear of individuation. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming a whole, integrated self, someone who accepts both the light and shadow aspects of their personality. It's a journey that requires facing uncomfortable truths, embracing responsibility, and stepping into adulthood fully. For the Puer Aeternus, individuation feels threatening. It requires leaving behind the fantasy of endless youth and potential. It means sacrificing the world of possibility for the reality of a single path, one life, one purpose. It's a death of the child self, and for many, this is terrifying. And yet, without individuation, a man cannot find true fulfillment. He remains fragmented, divided, always seeking something just out of reach. He may chase success, relationships, or adventure, but none of it brings lasting peace because he has not completed the inner work of becoming whole. The refusal to grow up is not a failure of will. It is a fear of transformation. But it is only through that transformation that true freedom can be found. Breaking free from Peter Pan syndrome is not about giving up joy or surrendering to a dull, lifeless adulthood. It's about stepping into the fullness of who you are meant to become. It's about trading an illusion of freedom for the kind of freedom that only comes through purpose, self-mastery, and responsibility. But how do you begin? The first step is self-responsibility. Not in the superficial sense of taking care of business, but in the deeper sense of owning your life. This means letting go of excuses, the blame placed on parents, society, or circumstance, and accepting that you are responsible for your path. Life may have dealt you an unfair hand. You may carry wounds that were not your fault, but healing, growth, and transformation are still your responsibility. Taking ownership requires radical honesty. To ask yourself, what am I avoiding? Where am I holding myself back? It is only by confronting these questions that real change begins. We are conditioned to see adulthood as the end of freedom. But in truth, adulthood offers a different kind of freedom, a deeper one. Childhood freedom is freedom from responsibility, but adult freedom is freedom through responsibility. The freedom to build, to create, to shape your world according to your values, to protect and provide for what matters to you. When you accept responsibility for your life, you are no longer a passive observer. You become the author of your own story. There is power in that, an exhilaration that no escapism or fantasy can provide. Purpose is not a prison. It's the key to authentic freedom. Mentorship and male role models. No man can walk this path alone. Mentorship and brotherhood are essential. In ancient times, young men were initiated into manhood through the guidance of elders, men who had walked the path before them and could point the way. Today, those figures are harder to find, but they are still out there. Seek out men who embody the virtues you aspire to: strength, integrity, wisdom, accountability. Learn from them. And if you can't find them in your immediate circle, look to books, history, philosophy. Let the voices of great men, living or dead, be your guides. And when you grow strong, become that role model for someone else. Men need other men to become men. At its core, breaking free from Peter Pan syndrome is about facing fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of death, fear of life itself. And there is no shortcut. You have to face it directly. Start small. Do the things you've been avoiding. Have the uncomfortable conversations. Make commitments, even when they scare you. Fail and try again. Each act of courage builds resilience. Each decision to stand firm rather than run away strengthens your character. Adulthood is not a place you arrive at. It's a process you commit to. Day by day, choice by choice. And with time, you realize something profound. Growing up doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding out who you truly are. We live in a culture that tells us growing up is something to fear. That adulthood is a slow surrender to monotony, obligation, and the erosion of everything that makes life worth living. But this is a lie, one that keeps many men trapped in a cycle of avoidance, never realizing that what they fear losing was never the point to begin with. Growing up isn't giving up. It's the opposite. It's stepping into something far more meaningful than perpetual freedom and endless escape. It's discovering a deeper sense of purpose, a sense of why you are here and who you are meant to become. Adulthood doesn't mean abandoning joy, wonder, or adventure. It means grounding those things in something real. It's about building rather than consuming, creating rather than drifting, loving with depth rather than avoiding attachment. And through that, you discover the kind of freedom that isn't fleeting, but lasting. The journey from Peter Pan to a man with purpose is not easy. It requires courage. It demands sacrifice. It asks you to leave behind the endless fantasies of what could be and instead embrace what is. But in doing so, you gain something far greater: the power to shape your life, to take ownership of your destiny, and to live with integrity and meaning. So the question remains: will you stay in Neverland? Or will you choose to grow up? Not because you have to, but because you're ready to become who you were always meant to be. The adventure doesn't end when you grow up. That's when the real adventure begins.